Mara Webster with In Creative Company, and today I'm so thrilled to be joined by the wonderful Carrie Coon to talk all about the White Lotus season 3. And one of the first things that I wanted to talk about is going all the way back to the first episode. I feel like for Laurie, the first night that she gets to the White Lotus, she has all these hopes and expectations and ideas of what
Mm.
this trip is going to be. And the first thing that happens to her is the moment she leaves the room, her friends are gossiping about her and she knows it. And it feels like that really just set the playing field for the insecurity that we've seen play out throughout the season. And so I was interested in how even just that first night and that first scene really set the stage for building that for you.
Mm. Well, it set the stage quite literally because I shot that on my first day of work. So the ladies were really shot out of a cannon. We were the first group up to film. So for the first, I don't know, 10, 12 days, it was just us. We were the only people shooting. So it felt like a show about 3 women. That's what it felt like for us. And that moment that Laurie has in the room, I love it because up until then, there have been some suggestions that things aren't exactly as they seem with the ladies, but that's the first crack in the veneer that we see. And it's scripted exactly like that. It was a short, silent, weird cry that immediately subsides. I mean, that's how it's scripted. So I have to give Mike credit for writing it that way because so many people have said to me how they feel seen in that moment. And of course, I think what gets revealed in the conversation before she goes into her room is that she does not share this feeling that they are on a victory tour. And you're absolutely right. She's there looking for something specific, but it looks more like a reclamation of something from her past before she had all these responsibilities and maybe before her life went awry. And here she is with these women who she thinks of and who seem outwardly very successful and satisfied. And Lori is not feeling that way. But she did not walk in and say to her friends, hey, listen, here are all the things happening with me. She decides instead to sort of keep up appearances. And that lack of authenticity is not sustainable.
I also love that description that you just described of how Mike scripted the cry as like, short, silent, weird, and then goes away, because it feels like something that's been, bubbling under the surface for her already. And I was interested in if for you, that moment and those emotions came from the history of the friendship and kind of residual emotions that come to the surface immediately being with them, or if it was to do with her life at home, because we know that there's a lot that she's really trying to escape feeling at the moment in that regard as well.
I think both those things are very astute and it can be more than one thing. I think it's everything. It's her life at home, how it's falling apart. And again, which is held in stark relief when she's in the room with those women celebrating their lives. She does not feel like celebrating. And then also in the feelings of defaulting to our roles in a group, whether it's our home life, with our families, whether it's with its old friends. There's a tendency to fall back into patterns of behavior. And in many ways, the dynamic with the ladies is about that. It's about old patterns of behavior and reactivity. If something is unexamined, if a pattern of behavior is unexamined, then it will often come out in a way that is reactive, right? Because it's not something you've investigated very thoroughly. And so you have an impulse and you just follow your impulse, maybe even without being aware of it consciously. And I think you're seeing a lot of that with the 3 women.
And I think what you're describing there about the history and kind of the regressive elements also plays into that fact of these are 3 friends that are kind of discovering in real time, is it shared interest in history and emotion, or is it just habit that has us together? And did you find that there was a clear-cut answer to that, or was it something that was constantly an ebb and flow for you and for Laurie?
You know, I think Lori, I think Lori's dawning awareness is that it feels more like habit and that she doesn't have as much in common with them as maybe she once thought. And I've certainly had that experience in my life. Um, I don't have like a solid group of girlfriends that I've gone on girls' trips with for decades. I know women who have that. I find it astonishing and remarkable, and I think largely very positive. But I believe that this behavior is also recognizable too, partly because of the way we use gossip. We use gossip to connect with each other. And anyone who's saying they haven't engaged in it, I think is probably lying. It's really hard to avoid. So I think for Lori, that's kind of what she's learning, but we'll see how it ultimately, how it ultimately ends for the ladies. But I think what your perception of whether that friendship should continue maybe says more about your life than it says about what the characters are doing.
I love that you're turning it on the audience for that.
Yes, yes, I think good art does that, right? Good art is holding up the mirror. And in fact, Mike had a lot of mirror imagery in the show. Some of the scenes have been cut that deal really explicitly with mirroring, but even that idea that they played this character where Jacqueline was the face and they were the hands, there's something about that. And the fact that they're referred to as a blonde blob, that they look the same, that you judge them immediately before they distinguish themselves throughout the season as different people and the ways in which they're different. And that's obviously very intentional on Mike's part.
And it presents the opportunity for them to hold up a mirror and to be self-reflective, but it feels like none of them are really finding their way there yet.
Yeah.
And how do you feel like that led to a lot of Lori being very emotionally reactive instead of
Mhm.
self-reflected in a lot of her responses?
Well, the other thing I'll say about Lori is that she's an alcoholic. I think what you see in the show, her friends refer to her drinking as problematic. You always see her drinking, and she makes some pretty bad decisions because she's drunk. And I will say that one of the primary tenets of going through something like AA, when you are trying to perhaps unwind some of those behaviors, has to do with taking responsibility for your actions. And Lori is not in a place where she's taking responsibility yet. And so she is inflicting her honesty on other people, but she is not necessarily reflecting on her part. And one of the questions we ask in AA and Al Anon is like, what is my part? And she is not actually taking on that question. And I think you're right. I think the other women perhaps aren't necessarily taking on that question either.
And I feel like in the way that you've reflected that, there's so many little details, even just in the background of scenes. And I know that you were very specific about she's always got one glass half empty and another one on
Yeah.
the way. But even again, going back to that first night, the fact that Kate says to her, like, maybe we should walk you to your room gives you a
Yeah.
sense of the level of inebriation. And so did you feel like even just the writing gave you that sense of where is she at in her day in terms of the drinking and in terms of what that's going to look like and how that's going to influence her choices?
Yes. I mean, I think that was an improv on Leslie's part. Good job, Leslie. But yes, it's very much in the writing, absolutely. And it's something you do keep track of, though in most scenes in the White Lotus, you're at meals and you're drinking anyway. So, and I'll say this, it's very hot and it's very humid. And if you've ever had a drink in a place where it's really hot and where you're dehydrated, you get drunk really fast. And you drink really fast, especially if something is cold. So it's all very much part of the environment they're in too. And of course, what do? They probably had those vacations. They refer to these prior vacations where they like went to Cancun, and got wasted and made bad decisions. How much has she really grown? She's a grown woman and she's still engaging in these behaviors. And so that's going to be problematic.
I mean, I feel like you brought up such a great point before about gossip as a form of connection for them. And we really see that in the way that they're not necessarily able to use it as the three of them, but as a one-on-one connector. And so when you were filming that scene with Leslie, where Lori kind of gets to be at the center of the gossip, how did you feel like that really allowed her to suddenly feel some connection for the first time on the trip?
Well, it's exactly that, right? She's taking an opportunity to share concerns with her friend, knowing full well that they've done the same thing about her behind her back. But what it also does is it doesn't hold Lori above it. When you see the first scene, there can be a lot of sympathy for Lori because they're gossiping about her. But then in the next episode, Lori turns around and does the exact same thing. So there's no, Mike is not holding anybody as morally superior. They all have these flaws. And there's no one person who's more sympathetic than any other person. And it's obviously a very human impulse to want to connect if you're feeling left out. I had a play date at my house. It was my two kids, 6 and 3, and a 5-year-old. And within the same 5-minute span of time, each one of them came up to me and said, "Nobody wants to play with me," crying. They were all having the exact same experience while they were playing together in a room. And it's not different than what's happening to these women. They're all left out waiting to happen. And if you think about people's experience of Instagram or TikTok or any social media, we are curating our lives, we are performing self, and everyone looking is feeling inadequate in some way. This is why when high schools enact a ban on phones or social media, what you hear overwhelmingly from students is that they are completely relieved because most of them have only done it because they feel pressured to do so. And they know in their hearts that it is not good for them. It is not good for their self-esteem to be living these lives where they're just comparing themselves all the time. And the reason is because our brains are set up that way. It's a biological imperative to compare ourselves. It's how we distinguish predators from prey, right? It's actually the way our brains are formed. So we are inclined to comparison. It's just that instead of focusing on our survival, we're now focusing on leisure time and our social capital because we have obviously leisure time to do it. And so those biological imperatives are out of control, and they're wreaking havoc on our identity and our self-esteem and our place in the world. And Mike is examining all of that with this trio.
I agree with all of that, and with Laurie especially, it feels like she's always very much felt herself comparing and very much felt in the shadows. That conversation about, oh, when we were kids and we played the whole body together, and she's like, well, Jacqueline, of course, was always the face, and
Right.
so you can tell that she's felt this way since they were kids. Um,
Yes.
and how did that idea of this is an emotion that she's been carrying with her entire life really shape so much of her as well?
Well, I'm a middle child. I'm very well aware of what it is to be in the middle of everything. I was always a little bit left out waiting to happen. It was it was kind of felt like I didn't fit anywhere, though I was well liked. I never felt like I had one specific place I fit in my life. So I related very much to that, even as I didn't relate to like vacationing with girlfriends. And, you know, uh, I just lost my train of thought. That left out. What was your question again?
It was about the way that ultimately she's felt left out since childhood, and it
Oh,
goes back to
yeah.
that feeling of always being in the shadows in this group.
Yes, yes, totally relatable. Oh, I know what I was going to say. So, fast forward to casting the White Lotus. Mike White puts me, uh, though I am actually younger than Leslie and Michelle, something that's been pointed out in social media. I'm a foot shorter than them, and they're both models, and we're wearing, bikinis and resort wear. There is no way that I am going to be adequate to these women in that setting, just objectively speaking, when you consider our standards of beauty. And so Mike very astutely has put me in the middle of the thing I am acting, right? Just again, when you consider objective beauty standards, not anything Leslie or Michelle is doing to me at all, just purely from the way the world sees women. There I am, literally, anytime we were sitting around a table, when they came to shoot my coverage, they'd have to put two cushions under me because Leslie and Michelle have long torsos and they very naturally sit above the table. And I'm like this, like a little shrimp. And so I was constantly reckoning with that fact. And the other fact that's out in the world for me as a woman being objectified in the White Lotus, I don't have Botox and I don't have filler, and I have no cosmetic procedures. This is a fact that will be highlighted over and over and over again by people who are watching the show. They will be comparing the actresses in those roles to each other. And I, as the person in the world who I read reviews, I keep up with the way the world is responding to my work. So I'm aware of all of that conversation happening around my appearance. I've also chosen to be basically nude, topless, after having two children at the tender age of 44. These are choices I'm making because I think personally that my vanity is not as interesting as some of the other things I get to explore as an artist. But it is painful. It is very hard to watch yourself aging in HD, especially if you're not choosing to engage in the things that would slow down that process. I'm choosing to take a stand for what a woman at 44 who has two young children actually looks like. And that is not easy. Now, I'm not patting myself on the back. It's just to say that there are so many things about just being a woman in the world that put you square in the face of dealing with the circumstances that Laurie is feeling in the show. So I had plenty of personal experience to draw from, even before the show came out.
No, I appreciate you sharing all of that because I think it's very astute and all very
Part of
true.
the conversation, it's part of the
Yeah.
conversation.
No, it's part of the brilliance of Mike's writing and what he wants to do with these characters and do with this show. It's so much beneath the surface as well. Which also kind of falls into that space of Laurie being someone that doesn't necessarily feel fully comfortable in her skin a lot of the times. And I think the costumes are such a great reflection. And I know that you kind of envisioned in New York, she's wearing the traditional like all black, dark colors going about your
Yeah.
day. And so it's almost like costume playing. Who am I going to be on holiday? But I don't have the time to go out and shop for it. So it's just haphazardly thrown together. And so how did that shape a lot of details? Because I know that even you wanted this like very specific bluish purple for the nails to feel that way as well.
Yeah, I mean, when we were choosing nail colors with the hair and makeup team, I just wanted the color to feel like just how I always feel when I get a manicure, which is like, nope, that was wrong. You walk out there like, that was not it again. I did it again. And so I just wanted Lori, who does not have time in this very high pressure world that she's operating in, doesn't have time to curate her look in the same way these other women have. And like you said, very intentionally wanted to make her costume plot not feel cohesive, feel haphazard. Like you say, who's she going to be on vacation? She doesn't know. She hasn't had a vacation in a long time, which is why the stakes are so high for her to have a good time. And so it should feel a little haphazard. And frankly, it's always going to feel a little frumpy because once again, I'm a foot shorter than Leslie Bibb and Michelle Monaghan. And the clothes just aren't going to sit the same way on me, which is, again, part of character. I also have wavy hair. Like she doesn't know how to do her hair in Thailand, just like Carrie Coon doesn't know how to do her hair in Thailand. So, there's a lot to relate to. But yeah, it's all character and fun to do and right. Those are the right choices for the character in this piece. I don't think it would feel right if I was as just tried to be as glamorous as the other women on the show, because I don't think that would be true to the story that we're telling in this, for the show.
Yeah, and there's these little details and nuggets of her home life throughout the script and throughout the episodes. And one of the things is, okay, she's always worked at the same law firm and she's basically given her whole life to them and now has been passed over for a promotion that she's wanted for a long time. So she has the ambition, but it's not being met the same way in that relationship. And did you feel like that also kind of spirals into this sense of self-identity? If I've tied up my whole worth in this one place, and that also leads into a lot of the jealousy that we see with Jacqueline as well.
Yes, yes. I mean, you're getting all of it. You should just you should just do the interview because you're absolutely right. Yes. Her career has not panned out the way she expected. Now, I know from speaking to some lady lawyers in my life that it's very common for women of a certain age to get passed over for partner because they have children and they have problems at home and they can't be on the phone 24 hours a day like some perhaps men can be. And so it's not unusual for women in those male dominated professions, which they still are male dominated, to be passed over in that capacity. And also maybe to decide they don't necessarily want to give their whole lives to a profession that's not necessarily as valuing them in the same way. Um, and that their skills are called into question more regularly, right? That has been the experience of a lot of women in this particular profession as well. And so, yeah, who are you then? If you've been your job and your job doesn't pan out, then who are you? And of course, Mike has set this season in a Buddhist country. There's this idea of no self, that there is actually no there, that all we are is this series of, electrical firings and impulses. All of it passes. It's all temporary. It's, you're standing in a river, but the water is moving. So is it the same river you're standing in? No. So the impulses of a human being are like a river going by, and there's no actual authentic center. And when we hold on to that identity, the only thing that comes from it is pain and suffering because it's not real. It's an illusion. And so for these women, this idea of the comparing mind in Buddhism is whether you hold yourself above someone or you see them as below you, there will be suffering, right? There's no way to escape suffering in that situation. And so the question I think he's asking is, can these women let go of this storytelling? It's very powerful to let go of storytelling. It's not easy, especially in cases of trauma, but it can be a very effective way to, eliminate the suffering from your life. And I think Lori's really re-entrenching in some of those stories, especially as what she experiences with Jacqueline is some old patterns of behavior and her perception of them. Now, whether or not they're entirely accurate, who knows? Whether or not her assessment of her job performance is accurate, we don't know. We are unreliable narrators. And, Mike's not afraid of that ambiguity, which I appreciate.
Also, when you were describing that idea of, when the water's kind of carrying you through, there's almost this sense for Laurie of the trip is happening to her. She's not creating the trip herself because, Jacqueline's the one that brought them out there. And so they're very much following her lead. Okay, if she says we're leaving this hotel pool, we're leaving
Right.
immediately. And I loved getting to see episode 7 where she does take that autonomy and she's like, you guys do whatever you want to do. I'm going to the fight and I'm going to have a great time. And it's
Mhm.
just, I'm going to own my time. How that goes is a little bit bumpy for her.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but but what did you kind of discover in her kind of taking the reins of I'm going to have the trip that I want to have in this moment
Yeah.
now?
Oh, yeah. It's interesting. It kicks off. There was a much longer scene leading up to the conflict at the table in episode 7, but the conflict is there, which is essentially them finally being honest with each other. And there is some liberation in that honesty. No one is pretending anymore. And Also, they give Lori something to prove, which is like, you're always disappointed. Why don't you take control of your life? And so she does. Now, you point out the results are mixed. She does maybe have a great time. She gets laid, maybe that's great, but then ultimately it's pretty humiliating. And she's put herself in maybe some compromising circumstances. And so, it's not entirely fulfilling, but the gauntlet was thrown and she takes it up. So it is, I don't know. It's again, like none of those experiences are one thing. It doesn't lead to ultimately proving the thing she wants to prove. It's a real mixed bag. And I think, Mike's not afraid of a mixed bag, which most decisions we make usually are.
Because at the beginning, she's achieving what she set out to and is kind of reclaiming it. And then the moment that she's laying there and he's like, you can direct deposit, you can chase, you can sell, you can Venmo me.
Yeah, you
How did
know.
you find the emotional response for her in that moment? Because it's so
Oh,
humiliating and
it's
heartbreaking.
so humiliating. And look, I'm a 44-year-old woman, and I am having scenes with these young actors who are in very good shape. And I'm in good shape in my own way, but not in the same way they're in good shape. It's not hard to access that part of me that wonders if the person you're with wants to be with you. Culturally, the world tells me they don't, right? Culturally, the world tells me I'm supposed to go away when I get to a certain age. And so I love that Lori does have that satisfying sex maybe in that moment. But yeah, me, the person, absolutely, I'd be wondering if that person wants to be with me. When that gets confirmed, because it's actually exploitative, and then this like woman comes through the door who must be the type of woman he's really interested in, it's very easy to relate to that. And of course, as the actor in sort of if you step back and you look at the meta of it all, you are performing that act on a set, typically filled with men, respectful, lovely men. I will say nothing bad. They were incredibly supportive. And I have found that to be the case throughout my career when I have to do things that are vulnerable like this. But it does not take away the fact of it, what you're doing in front of a room full of people. Remember, I am not alone doing that scene with Julian Kostov. I'm surrounded by people doing that scene. Now, that's a choice I'm making to do that scene. Not being victimized by it in any way, but it's like you can invite all of those feelings because they are all present in the room when you're going through something like that, which is my job as an artist to do.
No, and I think you capture, that rupture of emotions that she's feeling so great. And then I love the way that it immediately channels into this escapade of physical comedy, which
Yeah,
I know that you did yourself, and you were
yeah,
jumping in and out of that window at least, a dozen times to do
that's
that.
great.
What was the experience of filming that and everything that went into it? Because we still see the hurt even as she's jumping out the window, getting slapped by that woman.
I know, it's so silly. Well, it's really fun to get to do that stuff. And I know one of Mike's interests was the fact that we often see men getting caught and men having to escape, right? We don't think twice about a man hiding in a closet or jumping out of a window. But we don't often see a woman doing it. And so Mike was really keen on having a scene where that gender role gets flipped. And the important thing was that it not feel too self-conscious, right? That she's scrambling just like any dude to pull up her pants and get her shirt on and get out the door. So that was important to me. She was also incidentally wearing pants because we originally had that scene earlier in the schedule. And the stunt was actually going to be a 2-story stunt with like a fire escape. And it was a much more elaborate stunt that was going to require a harness and perhaps a stunt person. But because this drop was much less, we got to do it without any of those kind of safety, mechanisms in place. But I was still wearing pants, which I was sad about because it was very hot. Um, Luckily, I'd spent a lot of time in the gym because that's one of the places where there's air conditioning. So I've been doing a lot of pull-ups. I was ready to do that thing over and over. But as an actress, I'm always, always overjoyed to be invited to use my body and be physical. I'm an athlete. My inclination is to be physical. And so often that is not what female roles are asking from me. And so it's always a thrill to get to do that stuff. It's really fun. And we had a great night. My only regret is that in the scene that followed, because that was a long day at work and the sun was starting to come up and we still had a few shots to get. I never got the reaction I wanted running away. My shoe was actually like rubbing the skin off my foot. And I was in a lot of pain. And I just wasn't able to deliver that mix of like how absurd and kind of funny it was, the situation she was in. So that was kind of my only regret from the night, is that we didn't quite get that thing. But it's TV and sometimes it moves fast and you don't complete the thing to your satisfaction. But overwhelmingly, it was really fun.
It's such a wonderful scene, and I feel like it kind of adds on to the physicality that you've built the rest of the season so well, because one of my favorite moments was when they went out at the club and the dance move where she's, like, reeling the guy in like a fish and then, like, kind of drop kicks him away. I think there's something really fun in answering the question of how does this character dance and what does it look like when they're just letting free in that way? So how did you find that?
Well, my family would say, it's nothing we haven't seen you do at a wedding. They're kind of accustomed to my antics. But of course, that's not necessarily the way I've presented in my career with that kind. I often will play very dark characters, smart, emotional, right? A lot of crying. And I'm not necessarily asked to do the other side of it, which has much more levity. I did a dancing scene in The Nest, but I would argue the quality of that was very different than this. This is much more close to who I am at a family wedding. So I guess I had a lot of practice. Big family. It was just fun to get to let, we had a really good time that night. And Mike would sometimes give us adjustments like, she's not that drunk yet, or pull back. But the cool thing about Mike is that, and maybe you read this, is that he also was able, we would say, how does Patrick Schwarzenegger dance? And he did all the characters, right? He did Locke, he did Saxon, he does, he did all of them, and it was hilarious because he knows them all so thoroughly. And you're just in really good hands because he's investigated all of their circumstances, and you can trust his assessment of any scene that you're doing.
I love that, and I think especially because this allows for such a different style and expression in terms of performance for you than The Gilded Age, which, I know you were back on set like 2 weeks after finishing
Two
se
days,
2 days?
48 hours, 48 hours I was on set. Yeah.
That's wild because it's
It
such a
was.
different juxtaposition in terms of the restraint. And
Yes.
so what was that experience of playing a character like Laurie that's so physically expressive and
Yeah.
then stepping straight onto the Gilded set and just refinding that restraint for her?
I was terrible. I was just terrible at it. And I said to my crew, firstly, I had, I hadn't been in the country to do costume fitting. So a lot of my dresses hadn't been built yet. So they intentionally front loaded the schedule with bedroom scenes. So I was mostly just in my jammies and robes because those are kind of set. So that was a relief. I got to kind of ease my way back into the costume in my jammies. And yet finding her body again and her voice, it's TV and it moves really quickly. And I just said to my directors and to my crew, I said, listen, I know we have to move quickly, but I'm just not there yet. And I'm going to need extra time and extra takes until I remember who I am and what I'm doing. Because, of course, I was also catapulted back into my home life with my kids. They don't care about jet lag. They're just like, you're back. You've been gone. It is your turn. Right. And my husband also then started to like go away and do work that he'd been putting off. And so I just had a lot going on. And I was just not ready and not good enough an actor to just snap back in. It took me some time. I always say that when you revisit a character, it's like putting on a wet bathing suit. It's your bathing suit, but it doesn't feel great. And that's what it felt like for the first couple of weeks.
I
Literally.
totally understand that analogy. It's a great one.
Yeah.
Well, I love everything that you've built into Laurie as a character. Like genuinely, I look forward to watching your scenes so much and everything that you've brought to it. So congratulations. Thank you so much, Carrie.
Oh my gosh, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.